Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 37 team selection. There's only 2 weeks to go in FPL, and we have a long sort of road to getting towards the top 100,000. It's been a pretty rough season, I've got to be completely honest, and just trying to look to, week to week, finish as best as I possibly can. With the team that I have, and I think the team selection this week, what's nice, I suppose, is that I think a lot of teams are differentiated at this moment in time. So it's really just about things probably turning in my favor, where I can probably get a good rank rise, and some of that goes down to decisions like captaincy this week, which I think is actually very interesting. For my own team, I think probably the only sort of main conundrum that I'm dealing with personally is the idea of whether I should use one free transfer or use 2 free transfers on Gameweek 38 instead. The idea being loosely to consider going from something like Isak to Watkins this week, or save the transfers for game week 38 instead, and then actually move off of or move into certain players. So little things like, for example, monitoring Trippier, his kind of injury assessment, and even, for example, thinking about him in game week 38 kind of has a small soft impact on my team, because I was planning to play him in game week 38, and if he's not going to be fit for game week 38, then I've got a much weaker team at this moment in time. Not only that, but by moving into O'Brien 2 weeks back, that move has now sort of fallen flat on its head, not just because we lost the clean sheet versus Ipswich, but as we approach the Southampton at home game, he's still a bit of a doubt, and so I'm sort of waiting on news subject to that. So that's kind of why I've been sort of thinking about so many different types of moves in my head. I think the only nailed on move that I have in my mind for the rest of the season is probably this move of Palmer to Saka in game week 38, just giving respect to Nottingham Forest as a defense, even though they did just concede 2 goals to Leicester. But it's just the opportunity, I think, also to sort of move into Saka on game week 38, where I think he's still very much so clear of someone like Cole Palmer on that kind of week. Another thing that I'll probably mention too is when it comes to, let's say, monitoring, things like whether I should make this sort of move, would also be to sort of just think about, Chelsea and their involvement within the European Conference League final. That, in my opinion, has a soft impact on someone like Palmer's minutes, which is why I do quite like making that move. But the absence of a move this week is probably going to put me in a worse position. So for the moment in time, let's just jump into my Game Week 36 team review. As I mentioned, the O'Brien move just really hasn't worked out very well. Not only has it meant that he wasn't able to secure a clean sheet versus Leicester at home, which most teams do in the Premier League. So the second time I think I've invested into defenders that have just completely blanked with this golden goose of a fixture. But I guess the irony is that the player that I initially bought to target Leicester at home had got a clean sheet himself this week, and I probably would have played him, in all honesty, because I was not super keen on playing Trippier. Newcastle did end up cleaning, but I think that was sort of against my expectations, and I probably would have played Estupiñán over someone like an Ait Nuri this week. And instead, by moving O'Brien into the team out of Estupiñán, we did lose a few points there, but I don't really regret it. I do always like to take the opportunities with sort of targeting defenses like that, and it's more so that Everton actually had 2 amazing home games that really made me like the original Jake O'Brien move. So that's just that. With Henderson, I felt a bit more comfortable actually going for him over Pope. I just felt that Tottenham were going to heavily rotate, just on the precedents that we've seen from Ange and how he sort of managed the team as they sort of head towards this Europa League final. It just felt quite likely that Crystal Palace, with the sort of 6-day rest before the FA Cup final themselves, would have the opportunity to get a pretty easy result versus Tottenham. And so they did. But as it stands, Pope actually got a couple saves, outscored Henderson. Guardiola, the interesting piece, I suppose, is always just that a lot of people have recently moved into Ruben Diaz, and I think they've benefited a lot. I was also considering such a move before, let's say, the kind of Marmoush benching, but I wanted to wait for that sort of potential news. I was quite shocked, to be honest, that Haaland was actually going to start this match, especially, in advance of an FA Cup final, and him actually playing 90 minutes was a bit of a surprise. But at the same time, maybe it's also because he's actually been in training for a long time now, and Pep has actually had the confidence that Haaland can actually play a full match. So that's kind of Pep for you. As far as, let's say, the midfield, just recapping over there, the great differential was Eze, but I guess even having money in FPL isn't really something that's very useful, given that I own Salah, Palmer, and they've been, frankly, pretty turgid as of late. Palmer, a little bit more of an extended streak outside of the Liverpool game where he was great, and I was looking forward to future games with him, but alas, Jackson sort of had other things to say. In the forward position, I went for Wissa from Marmoush. I actually was considering Wood, but ultimately settled on Wiese because I just felt like the three fixtures overall for Brentford were actually better than Nottingham Forest's. So far, of course, it's gone very much so in the favor of Wood, and that happens from time to time in FPL. Unfortunately, our knee was also very much injured within that game, so hopefully he recovers fine. That was pretty much the only thing I was, looking forward to seeing news-wise this week, and unfortunately just hasn't developed very well. As far as Isak, he's clearly a huge contender for a potential transfer, and some people might actually own the combination of Isak and Watkins, but in my sort of position with the team, with the amount of money that I've spent in certain positions, Isak to Watkins is probably the only way I can really get to Watkins. And it's a very interesting move to make this week because it's almost like you're making 2 steps forward, but potentially making 1 step back by going into Ollie Watkins when you consider the fixtures and how they kind of turn a little bit in Gameweek 38. As it stands, of course, well, a team like, let's say, Aston Villa probably actually get to maximize in terms of 2 teams that are rotating with having Tottenham at home and then Man United away, because both these teams, Tottenham and United, will be playing sort of in the middle of Gameweek 37-38. So I think the pro is that we know that absolutely these teams are going to rotate on 37, but more than likely, they're probably going to put their best foot forward in the middle of the week. And hopefully that means that Aston Villa can also take advantage in Gameweek 38, where they have everything to play from their season, similar to Isak, I suppose, who, similar to the likes of Salah and Palmer has been rather cold as of late. Evan Nilsson, yeah, I mean, I guess he outscored Kluivert, and that's the only positive that I can really say within the context of this team. Somehow I also had 2 defenders who, approaching the end of the season now, who, might not even play for me, but I'm just going to have to hope that they come back and not want to sort of use transfers unless I absolutely have to when it comes to Gameweek 38. So that's pretty much the team, and that's kind of the general team outlook. I think it's positive, of course, that I have someone like Pope in Gameweek 38. That's really nice when Henderson actually has Liverpool away. But with Eze, it seems like he's probably a piece where ultimately I don't feel too bad about benching him versus Liverpool in the final fixture of the season. And as long as I guess Kluivert is allowed to play football, the team looks pretty good in a 3-4-3 structure next week. So let's just jump into the Gameweek 37 team selection, and let's have a look at some of Rob T's market odds this week as we kind of support the decision making around the team. So as things stand, it seems like the markets have very much heavily reacted to the potential for European rotation. That's why the Chelsea and Aston Villa goal line seems absurdly large compared to the quality of the opponents. But at the same time, when you look at the league table, Tottenham and United are very far down the bottom and not too far away from some of our relegation friends here. 2 of those relegation friends are facing off against each other, so it doesn't feel like there's too much upside there, just in the sense that it's almost like, an equivalent team playing versus another. Other than that, Everton have really good clean sheet odds, and that's a huge pro this week. City probably dipping when it comes to just the aggregate 2 fixtures towards the end of the season, so probably if you've been double invested into City defense, I guess this could be the time to sort of move on one of those pieces, or just simply play this piece this week at next week and just have an insured sort of rotation in place for Gameweek 38, for example. Otherwise, I think a lot of the games are actually very evenly matched. It seems like Arsenal are close to coming towards full strength, and that Arsenal versus Newcastle game is interesting because both teams are still technically sort of securing their spots within the top 5. Very unlikely that Arsenal are going to find themselves outside of the top 5, in my opinion, but they're still putting their best foot forward within the league. I'm already quite heavily invested into Brentford, so that's that. And let's just jump into the team section. So, leaning on that sort of defensive aspect, I think for people who actually want defensive transfers, I actually really do like a Chelsea defender this week because I think the double fixture aspect of things in terms of Gameweek 37-38 is actually the most riveting. Within the context of my own team, I think that I'm just going to have to hope that O'Brien plays and starts, because what a wonderful week it is to actually have him versus Southampton at home. Guardiola and Nico Williams will definitely be playing within my team. Not definitely, I suppose, because Nico Williams is a bit of a 50-50 with Ait-Nouri. I do kind of like playing Nico Williams over Ait-Nouri tentatively for now, just because I have Eze within my own team, and I probably would actually like to bench Ait-Nouri, all things being said, as long as O'Brien's fit. At the time of recording, of course, I don't really know whether O'Brien is going to be fit, so the hope is that he is. I believe that just reading into some of the reporting and obviously what Moyes had also mentioned about O'Brien, it seemed like it was actually a very late call made around his fitness and availability on the Friday just before the Gameweek 36 deadline. So hopefully he's fine. Henderson will be playing versus Wolves at home, which I think is a very nice game. Keep in mind this Palace game happens very late into the game week. I think it happens on Tuesday. So that just means that teams like Crystal Palace and Man City, yes, of course, are going to go full strength within the FA Cup final, most likely. But it also means that I guess they don't have too much rest time between that and their Tuesday match. Even still, it's a home game. And I still think I'll take my chances with these Crystal Palace players over, let's say, the likes of Pope or over like the likes of Kluivert versus Man City away. So that's kind of how I plan to play the team. In the midfield, I've already mentioned that I'm going to be playing Eze. Supporting as is going to be Salah, Palmer, and Mbeumo. Captaincy is definitely interesting. I'm sure no one actually is considering a Palmer captaincy, but I do own Palmer, and I think he is quite a riveting type pick. A lot of talk has been sort of made about Watkins' captaincy this week, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You never even know if he actually potentially could be on penalties, even over Asensio, and whether the sort of pecking order has changed, even though Asensio clearly is within the pecking order. Rodgers, interestingly, isn't within the pecking order. I think Emery sort of made a mention of almost a list of players who could actually potentially take a penalty. I think McGinn was definitely within that list, and so he might be, the odd player who potentially gets a penalty. But I think Wisa, isn't on penalties, but Watkins is within the mix. So that's interesting when it comes to sort of things like captaincy. As far as, when I think about my own team, I'm sort of reluctantly playing Salah at this point. I think it feels weird to sort of move into Haaland, where I just don't think there's too much upside. And if I went with a no Salah draft, I would probably be loving life right now, because I'd probably actually get some points from some serious midfielders, but that's that. With Palmer, as I said, I'm considering captaincy. With Mbeumo this week, it's actually still quite a good matchup, just because it's a home game. And the Fulham team have been slipping a little bit, right? They're technically on the beach because they sort of have nothing to play for within the position that they're at within the league. And there have been some pretty abysmal results. Like, I think conceding 3 goals to Everton says a lot about the team, and a little bit less so about Everton as an offense, right? We know Everton have been a really poor offense for the course of the season, even really under Moyes. But look, scoring 3 versus Fulham, I think is very impressive, because Fulham, for the most part of the season, have posted really good underlying stats, and that was a bit of a shock to me. As far as the forward line, I'll definitely be playing Evan Nilsson. It's just one of those things where the minutes for Kluivert just look really, really poor, although it helps, I suppose, that some of his replacements, like, for example, Alex Scott, who played instead of him, also didn't play very well and was actually subbed off at halftime. The casual or ever-present stinker and hooked. As far as, let's say, Isak and Wisa, they're on the team now, but as I said, I'm very much considering this Watkins move. So the plan with this week, I think, as long as we don't get crazy news within my team. So, for example, if I get reasonable assurances that someone like, let's say, O'Brien could feature, reasonable assurances that everyone else in my team is allowed to play football this week, I do really like just simply moving Isak to Watkins, hoping for the absolute best here within this Gameweek 37 fixture, hoping that Watkins overperforms. Do I captain Watkins, though? I think I probably still wouldn't. I would just still take my chances with Cole Palmer. He's at 3 to 6% sort of effective ownership, just for looking at the last few weeks as an example amongst sort of any sort of ranked tier that I kind of want to get to. And I'd probably take my chance with that. I think he's probably one of the biggest differential captaincies. I say this thinking about the amount of times I've differential captained Palmer this season, and it hasn't gone right. But for me, that isn't really like any sort of lesson, right? That's just outcome in a sense. I think there's a reason, or there must be a reason, that markets still should predict Palmer to be an amazing player, someone with high goal scoring odds, assist odds, etc. So I'll take those chances, and I'll take Palmer this week versus a heavily rotated United team, no doubt. We're seeing a lot of defenders rather within the United team, seemingly not available for this game. I think that's a huge pro. It's also Chelsea at home, which I think is nice. And that's that, right? That's going to be the team. In the bench, we're going to have Pope, Kluivert, Aït-Nouri, Trippier in that order. I do plan to, just have Aït-Nouri sort of simply replace O'Brien. Even if O'Brien's out, I think I'd keep the team exactly as it is and just use one free transfer from Isak to Watkins. And so with a view towards, maybe using one final free transfer within the sort of attacking or midfield position next week, where I'm pretty happy with the forwards, clearly, because I've got 2 players within Bournemouth who get to face off versus Leicester at home. And that's kind of the position we're at. Game week 37 is here. That's the team that I'm going to be fielding out with my team selection. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I look forward to the end of the season. But I hope you guys have some wonderful green arrows as we close in at the end. And I just hope for one last hurrah in Game week 38, where fortunately for the last 2 seasons, I've had some really nice days at the pub in FPL meets over there, and I look forward to that coming very, very shortly. But for now, enjoy Game week 37, and I'll see you guys soon.